There are moments when words lie, but the body betrays the truth. In every conversation, negotiation, or relationship, there are hidden signals unfolding right in front of you, unnoticed by most, yet decisive in shaping the outcome. These signals are not spoken aloud. They live in the subtle shifts of posture, the calculated movements of the hands, the tension around the eyes, the way someone leans in or pulls away. They are the whispers of manipulation, the silent codes of influence that few ever learn to decode. Machiavelli, who understood power as theatre, would recognize these signs as the true stage where domination is played out. He would remind us that the manipulator does not announce his intent. He cloaks it in charm, disguises it in casual gestures, hides it behind a smile that arrives a second too late, or lingers just long enough to unsettle. These signs form the invisible architecture of control, designed to bypass your rational defenses and seep into your instincts. And once you feel them without realizing it, you are already entangled in a game not of your choosing. The tragedy is that most people assume manipulation requires grand schemes or dramatic words, when in reality it begins in the smallest micro-expressions, the way someone occupies space, or the rhythm of silence they impose. Every hidden manipulator knows that the body speaks a louder truth than language, and they exploit it with precision. What appears to be a simple gesture is, in fact, a move on the chessboard of human psychology. What feels like a normal interaction is often the opening act of control. To ignore these signs is to walk blindfolded into a battlefield. To notice them is to begin reclaiming your power. Machiavelli would argue that survival in a world ruled by hidden games demands that you learn to read the body not as decoration, but as strategy, because those who cannot see are destined to be moved by those who can. Machiavelli, more than a political thinker, was a keen observer of human nature, and his insights into power remain timeless because they deal with what is most constant in us: our instincts, our ambitions, and our fear of being deceived. He understood that true power does not announce itself with grand proclamations or flamboyant displays. Instead, it resides in subtleties, in the quiet mechanics of influence that most people overlook. A manipulator does not need to speak openly about control. His power leaks through the way he positions his body in a room, how he controls silence, how his gaze lingers with intention, how he tilts his posture to dominate space without uttering a single word. These are not coincidences, they are strategies. For Machiavelli, words were unreliable tools, easily crafted masks. But the body, despite its attempt to conceal, cannot help but reveal. It betrays both weakness and intent, and it is here that the manipulator finds his playground. He refines the ability to use stillness as intimidation, to bend gestures into authority, to turn the smallest movement into a command. What Machiavelli teaches us is not simply that manipulation exists, but that its truest form is invisible, disguised as normal human interaction. The greatest strategists in history did not shout their power, they embodied it. Kings, generals, and statesmen maintained influence not only by what they decreed, but by the way they carried themselves, the aura their presence projected before a single word was spoken. To Machiavelli, the human body was as much a weapon as the sword, but subtler and far more enduring. In recognizing this, he left us a warning. Those who ignore the body's signals will always be the easiest to control. To study body language through a Machiavellian lens is to begin seeing beyond appearances, to witness the silent strategies of power that shape outcomes long before decisions are spoken. It is here in the hidden theater of gestures and silence that the manipulator reveals himself. Most people think manipulation begins with carefully chosen words, persuasive arguments, or clever rhetoric. They imagine manipulation as something loud, obvious, or openly aggressive. But in truth, as Machiavelli would point out, the game begins long before language is spoken. The first weapon of the manipulator is not the tongue, but the body. The body sets the stage for influence before the mind even realizes what is happening. Her seemingly harmless crossing of arms, a slight lean forward at the right moment, a calculated pause that stretches into silence. These are not random movements. They are the silent theater of control. The manipulator knows that the subconscious mind responds faster than reason. and so he uses gestures to bypass your logic and speak directly to your instincts. Averted eyes can plant doubt, prolonged eye contact can establish dominance, and subtle touches can create an illusion of connection or superiority. These are the invisible threads that pull people without their awareness. Society often trains us to focus on words, to take meaning only from what is said, but the manipulator thrives on this blindness. He understands that posture communicates confidence or insecurity, that the pace of breathing reveals fear or composure, that even the rhythm of nodding can coax compliance. None of this needs explanation aloud. It is absorbed unconsciously, leaving the victim convinced they made a choice freely, when in fact they were guided step by step. Machiavelli would remind us that in the theatre of power, appearances are weapons sharper than blades. A politician's rehearsed smile, a leader's controlled stillness, a partner's subtle withdrawal of touch, all of these craft narratives more powerful than speeches. To misread the body is to misread the entire strategy unfolding in front of you. Recognizing this diagnosis of how manipulation truly operates forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous forms of control are not shouted into our ears, but whispered into our nervous systems through the body's silent codes. To move through life without perceiving the signals of manipulation is to walk blind through a battlefield. Every interaction, every conversation, every negotiation carries a hidden layer of meaning that is not spoken but performed. When you fail to notice these cues, you enter the game already disarmed, vulnerable to forces you cannot name but inevitably feel. It is the cost of unconsciousness, the invisible tax paid by those who mistake appearances for reality. The manipulator counts on your blindness. He relies on your habit of listening only to words, believing only in explanations, ignoring the tension in his jaw or the way he subtly angles his body to control the space. You nod along, thinking you are choosing freely while your nervous system is already bending to his unspoken authority. Machiavelli would say that this blindness is fatal, for power is never about what is declared, it is about what is imposed without question. The one who fails to read the body is like a soldier entering combat without armor, unaware that the enemy has been watching his every move, exploiting his every weakness. In relationships, this ignorance means giving trust too quickly, missing the signs of domination concealed in a smile or a touch that lingers too long. In business, it means conceding ground without knowing why, accepting terms that feel uncomfortable but somehow inevitable. The cost of such unconsciousness is not always immediate, but it accumulates like hidden debt, broken confidence, drained energy, repeated patterns of betrayal. It is like playing chess without realizing half the pieces are already gone. The manipulator thrives not because he is stronger, but because his opponent never learned to see. The danger lies not in what he says, but in what he does without words, and when you cannot perceive it, you are already entangled. To remain blind in this way is to live permanently at a disadvantage, mistaking defeat for chance when in reality it was scripted in the unspoken theater of the body. Machiavelli understood that domination rarely arrives with thunder and spectacle. It slips in quietly, almost invisibly, through gestures that appear harmless but are charged with intent. A hand placed on the table at the right moment, a pause that forces you to fill the silence, a look that lingers a fraction too long. All of these are maneuvers in the silent art of control. The manipulator does not need to raise his voice or declare his authority, because his power is enacted in ways your body registers long before your mind begins to question. This is the inevitable consequence. When you fail to recognize the signals, you surrender ground without even realizing it. You mistake submission for choice. You convince yourself that you are acting freely, while in truth, the script has already been written for you. This is the genius of subtle manipulation. It does not require force, only your unawareness. A calculated gesture plants doubt in your mind, and you adjust your behavior without being asked. A deliberate display of confidence makes you second-guess your own. Slowly, space is ceded, boundaries are eroded, and what once felt like balance becomes quiet subjugation. Machiavelli would insist that the manipulator's brilliance lies in making the victim participate willingly, believing they are still in control. That is the trap, ensnarement disguised as autonomy. To ignore this reality is to walk into every negotiation, every relationship already compromised. The cost is not just tactical loss, but psychological entanglement, because once you are caught in the manipulator's rhythm, it becomes harder to remember where your will ends and his influence begins. The inevitable consequence is not sudden defeat, but gradual erosion, the slow bending of your posture, the subtle silencing of your voice, until you realize too late that you have been shaped by another's intent. Machiavelli would call it the most efficient form of power, control that requires no declaration, only your failure to see. From the medieval courts where nobles measured power with a glance, to the corporate boardrooms of today, where executives battle silently for dominance, manipulation has always worn the same disguise. The body performing truths the mouth will never confess. Across centuries, cultures, and contexts, the same archetypal dance repeats itself. The manipulator may change costumes, king, priest, politician, CEO, but the mechanics of influence remain strikingly similar. The body becomes the stage, and every gesture, every pause, every subtle shift in presence communicates what cannot be safely spoken aloud. It is a universal law. While words can be crafted and rehearsed, the body leaks intention. A monarch's stillness once conveyed divine authority. Today, a manager's calm posture signals unshakable control. In both, the principle is identical. Silence and subtlety are more powerful than noise. Machiavelli would recognize this as the eternal pattern of human interaction, proof that manipulation does not belong to one age, but to the very fabric of social existence. The body carries the shadow of intent, and those who know how to harness it possess an advantage that transcends time. Consider how, in every culture, eye contact functions as both connection and weapon. A steady gaze can inspire loyalty or trigger submission. Averted eyes can suggest guilt or create mystery. These signals are as old as humanity itself, yet they remain largely unconscious. The manipulator, whether instinctively or strategically, exploits this ignorance. He knows that a hand resting too close can unsettle, that a smile timed precisely can disarm suspicion, that leaning back can create distance that forces others to chase approval. These gestures are not random. They are archetypal, embedded in the shared human psyche, operating beneath awareness. What is universal is not the manipulator's intent alone, but the victim's blindness, the recurring inability of people to notice the theater before them. The body's role as both weapon and confession makes manipulation inevitable across every age. From medieval chambers to modern offices, the story is the same. The body speaks the language of power, and those fluent in it rule over those who only listen to words. The moment you begin to recognize the manipulator's silent theater, you gain an advantage that most people never experience. Awareness transforms the dynamic. You no longer need to react impulsively or meet manipulation with open confrontation, because that would only feed the game. Instead, like a strategist trained in patience, you withdraw, not physically but mentally. You create a space between their performance and your perception, a psychological distance where their gestures lose their power to control you. The manipulator thrives on immediacy. He wants your instinct to answer before your reason awakens. By pausing, by stepping back internally, you deny him that control. Every calculated smile, every intimidating silence, every subtle invasion of space becomes a clue rather than a trap. You watch without being pulled in, allowing the manipulator to reveal more than he intended. This is the essence of preparation, refusing to play the role assigned to you, while quietly studying the script being performed. Machiavelli would argue that true strength lies in restraint, in the ability to delay action until the precise moment when response becomes most effective. Withdrawal is not weakness. It is a strategy of conservation. Instead of wasting energy fighting shadows, you gather insight. Instead of being baited into emotional reaction, you analyze the rhythm of the game, seeing patterns others miss. And with every observation, the manipulator's supposed advantage turns into vulnerability, because his power depended on your blindness. When you withdraw, you break the spell of his performance. You preserve your clarity, hold your ground without force, and position yourself to respond from choice rather than compulsion. This preparation transforms encounters. Negotiations become fields you navigate with foresight. Relationships shift from entanglement to awareness, and conversations that once drained you become opportunities to test your discernment. The manipulator remains the same, but you have changed. By refusing to be drawn into the scene, you step into the role of strategist, and in that silence of withdrawal, you prepare the ground for a victory that does not require noise. When you learn to read the hidden signals of a manipulator, the entire game changes. At first, this awareness feels like a shield, a way to defend yourself from the invisible threads pulling at your choices. But soon, it becomes more than defense. It becomes vision, a new way of seeing the world that elevates you above the surface drama. Every gesture, every pause, every micro-expression reveals its purpose to you, and in that revelation, power shifts. You are no longer reacting to manipulation, you are anticipating it, navigating around it with calm precision. The manipulator, once confident in your blindness, finds his tactics exposed under your gaze. His rehearsed charm becomes obvious, his silence is transparent, his subtle attempts at dominance almost predictable. This is the turning point. You no longer play on his terms. You set the rhythm because foresight always outmaneuvers force. Machiavelli would say that power belongs to those who see the invisible currents shaping behavior, and by mastering this perception, you move into a higher tier of strategy. Instead of being trapped in the performance, you sit in the audience, studying the actors, deciding if and how you will engage. And when you do choose to act, your response is measured, deliberate, devastatingly precise. In negotiations, this means steering outcomes without revealing your hand. In relationships, it means maintaining sovereignty even when others attempt to bind you. In social dynamics, it means recognizing the hierarchy of gestures before words are even spoken, allowing you to position yourself advantageously without conflict. To return with this kind of vision is to carry a new authority, one that does not need to announce itself. You command not through intimidation, but through presence, through the calm certainty that comes from seeing what others overlook. The manipulator thrives in darkness, but you have turned on the light. And once you see, you cannot unsee. This clarity becomes your strength, and with it you begin not just to survive manipulation, but to master the terrain of power itself. Machiavelli would remind us that true mastery is never loud, never flamboyant, never desperate for attention. The one who commands real power does not need to dominate a room with noise because his authority resides in what he perceives. To see the silent game being played beneath words is to break free from its hold. Once you recognize the body's hidden codes, the gestures meant to corner you, the silences designed to unnerve you, the charm engineered to disarm you, you can no longer be moved like a pawn. You stand apart, no longer trapped in the manipulator's theater, because you have seen the stage directions written in his movements. Freedom begins in perception. Most people live bound to appearances, enslaved by words, convinced by tones of voice or polished explanations. But the master, as Machiavelli envisioned him, is the one who sees beyond the mask, who reads intent in posture, who interprets power in the smallest tilt of the head. To reach this level is to step out of the invisible prison where so many remain, ruled by forces they cannot name. You are no longer deceived by surface performances, you discern the hidden script. And with this discernment comes liberation. The manipulator may continue to play his role, but his influence dissolves because the moment you see the trick loses its power. This is the philosophical synthesis. Strength is not measured in how forcefully you resist manipulation, but in how clearly you perceive it. Power does not belong to the one who shouts the loudest, but to the one who listens differently, who sees what others ignore. Machiavelli would say that freedom is not given, it is seized through awareness. When you learn to read the unspoken language of the body, you take back control of your choices. You stop being moved, and you begin to move with intention. And in that clarity, you are no longer a subject of manipulation. You are sovereign. What patterns have you noticed in the people around you? Have you seen the way someone's eyes shift when they want to hide intent, or how a forced smile appears at the exact moment they want you to trust them? Share in the comments what you have already recognized, because your perspective may open someone else's eyes. This is not just theory. It is survival in a world where power is rarely declared, but constantly performed. If you have stayed with me this far, it means you already feel the importance of learning to read these signs. Don't let this awareness stop here. Subscribe, because what you have discovered today is only the surface. In the next videos, I will break down how to use your gaze as a shield, how silence can become your sharpest weapon, and how presence itself can shift the balance of power without a single word spoken. Machiavelli would insist that knowledge is only useful when applied, and each lesson ahead is designed to sharpen your perception so you no longer move blindly in the game of influence. Ask yourself, how much stronger would you be if every room you entered, you could see what no one else sees? This journey is not about paranoia, but about clarity, about reclaiming the freedom that comes when you are no longer moved like a piece on someone else's board. So leave your insights below, join this community of conscious observers, and prepare to step into a level of awareness that turns manipulation into transparency. The game of power will never disappear, but once you can see it, you are no longer prey, you are strategist. Subscribe now, because the next step is learning how to wield these invisible tools with precision, just as Machiavelli would have advised.